Hi, I'm Marilee. 3 months ago, my sister told our entire family that I stole her designer wedding shoes. I didn't. But they didn't ask. They kicked me out of the only home I'd ever known, erased me from the wedding, and replaced me with silence. Since then, I've uncovered a confession, exposed a lie that went viral, and watched my family pretend none of it ever happened. But what hurts most isn't that they believed her. It's that they were waiting for a reason to cut me loose. They just needed her lie to make it official. So what happens when the scapegoat refuses to stay quiet? Would you still go to Thanksgiving if the empty chair at the table was yours? And they put it there on purpose? It started the way most family chaos does, dressed up in lace and politeness. The house was already transformed. Ribbons along the banister, candle samples for the tables, lists taped to cabinets. It was a wedding headquarters, and I was just a misplaced item in it. I wandered past the dining room, where my sister, Callista, and my mom laughed over swatches of blush-colored linens. My footsteps didn't interrupt them. They didn't even glance up. Callista had always known how to fill a room, and I'd learned how to shrink myself in them. There's a difference between being invisible and being unnecessary, I remember thinking, leaning against the doorframe. And I was starting to feel like both. I'd been back home for a few months. Job laid off, savings low, no prospects on the horizon. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. But temporary started to look permanent. And in a house where my presence was barely tolerated on a good day, permanence felt like a threat. The heels went missing 2 days before the wedding. Louboutin, white satin, a gift from Griffin's mother, who said they'd been in the family since 1984, which to me made them shoes. To Callista, they were a crown. I was in the kitchen, microwaving coffee when it started. Callista's voice pierced from the hallway. "Where the hell are my shoes?" The kind of silence that follows that kind of scream isn't peace, it's fear holding its breath. She stormed in seconds later, eyes wild. "I left them right here, right by the sink. You were the only one home, Marilee." My mug stayed midair. "I didn't touch anything." "Don't play dumb," she hissed, like we were sharing a secret. "You've always had a weird thing about my stuff. You hate when I get attention." I turned to respond, but footsteps filled the hall. Mom, then Dad, then Griffin behind them. Mom's voice cracked first. "What's going on?" "She took my wedding shoes," Callista said. Loud, clear, final. I waited for someone to laugh, to say how ridiculous that sounded. No one did. Griffin stood behind the kitchen island, his arms crossed, his gaze never met mine. That, more than the accusation, cut deep. He didn't need to say anything. His silence was an agreement written in stone. "I didn't take anything," I said, barely loud enough to hear over my own heartbeat. But the room had already shifted. I wasn't just out of place, I was on trial. They gathered in the living room. I followed, not really knowing why. Maybe I still believed someone would say something to make it stop. Callista curled into the couch, crying without smudging her makeup. Vivian sat beside her, squeezing her hand like she'd been told her daughter had a terminal illness. Silas paced, hands on hips. "Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be," Mom whispered. I stood across from them, facing the people who raised me, loved me, once cheered at my high school graduation. Now, they looked at me like I'd grown horns. "Why would I even want your shoes?" I asked. Callista sniffed. "Maybe to sell them. You haven't had a job in months." That one landed. The whole scene had the rhythm of something rehearsed, like I was a guest in a play I'd never auditioned for. Nobody asked where I was when the shoes went missing. Nobody asked why I'd suddenly decide to sabotage the most important event in my sister's life. They didn't need logic. They had narrative. I didn't stay to argue. Back in my room, I closed the door gently, locked it, pressed my back to the wood, and waited for tears that never came. I could have begged. I could have cried. But when you're on trial in your own house, you don't scream. You study the jury. And the jury had already voted. Later, I checked my phone. No texts, no missed calls, not even a casual, "You okay?" from Dad. the kind he used to send when I lived in Chicago and forgot to check in for a week. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. I felt the weight of something shifting, something you can't name until much later. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was knowing they didn't hesitate. The shoes vanished, but so did something else that day. My right to be believed. The next morning came in pieces. First the creak of floorboards, then the sound of something sliding across carpet. I opened my eyes before the alarm could pretend to be useful. There was movement outside my door, subtle but deliberate. My stomach sank before I moved a muscle. I opened the door slowly, careful not to let it creak. Standing in my room were my mother and sister, Vivian unzipping bags like she owned them, and Callista pulling open drawers like she was looking for a lost earring. Silas leaned in the doorway, arms folded, mouth tight, saying nothing. "We're just trying to clear the air," Mom said, like she was making tea. Callista held up a pair of old nude pumps I hadn't worn in years. "See? She kept these knockoffs. Don't tell me she wouldn't swap mine for cash." No one asked permission. No one looked ashamed. I didn't even flinch. There's a kind of silence that settles in your body when people violate your space and treat it like routine. Not shock, something colder. Recognition. I stood there barefoot, in my oldest pajamas, watching them comb through the last bits of privacy I had. I didn't defend myself. Not because I couldn't, because they'd already made up their minds. After they left, I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like an hour. I wasn't crying. I wasn't numb. I was just removed, not from the room, from their reality. Later that day, Mom asked me to come downstairs. The kitchen smelled like too strong coffee and furniture polish. Dad stood by the counter, hands in his pockets. He didn't meet my eyes. Vivian stirred her cup as if she had something better to say, but couldn't quite land on it. "We think it's best you sit this one out," she said, calm and careful. I waited for the rest. For everyone's peace of mind. My chair scraped as I pulled it out. "You're uninviting me from my sister's wedding?" Silas looked over, finally speaking. "Don't think of it that way. Think of it as letting things cool off." Vivian slid a paper across the table. A printed wedding itinerary. My name, originally typed under bridal family seating, had been struck through with a thick black Sharpie. It was methodical, deliberate, almost surgical. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. They weren't looking for a reaction. They were looking for compliance. That evening, the house turned into a production. Florists arrived. Catering staff did a walkthrough. Callista pranced around in a white jumpsuit like she was starring in her own movie. I passed Griffin in the hallway. He looked up once, just long enough to register that I still existed. Then he turned his head, as if I were part of the wallpaper. There was a time he would have pulled me aside, asked what was going on. I remembered him fixing a crooked painting in my apartment once, unprompted. He noticed things, details, moments. But now? He noticed me just enough to pretend I wasn't there. I spent the night packing slowly. There wasn't much to take. My laptop, a phone charger, 2 books I kept more for memory than use. I had $280 in my checking account and no job. No backup. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. No one asked. Before zipping my duffel, I realized something. One of my old pairs of shoes was gone. Not the expensive kind. The ones Callista had mocked earlier. I stood in the middle of the room, looking at the spot where they'd been. Maybe they took them as some strange form of evidence. Maybe they wanted to complete the story. Maybe I was just an easy character to rewrite. By the time I stepped outside, the house behind me was still lit like nothing had shifted. Like I wasn't leaving with less than I came with. They didn't throw me out with yelling or slamming doors. They just didn't leave space for me to exist. When I arrived at Elra's, the first thing she did was open the garage door. There wasn't a dramatic welcome, no teary hug or pity in her voice. Just a simple gesture, clearing space in the converted guest room above the garage and tossing a set of fresh sheets onto a futon already half buried under her college storage boxes. "You don't need to say anything," she told me. "I know what this family's capable of." That one sentence meant more than any apology I hadn't received. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I was too tired for that. My body ached in a way that had nothing to do with muscles or bones. It was something deeper, a heaviness I couldn't stretch out of. I unpacked slowly, if you could even call it that. A few shirts, the laptop, the same charger I nearly forgot in the rush. Ilara handed me a towel and said the water pressure in the bathroom upstairs sucked, but the hot water worked fine if you gave it a minute. That night, the futon creaked every time I shifted. I stared at the ceiling until the shapes of the boxes around me turned into shadows, and the only sound was the occasional train horn from a few streets over. In less than 2 days, I'd gone from, "Can you help pick flower arrangements?" to, "You should probably not come at all." The next morning, I wandered downstairs to find Ilara's mom, Rowena, standing at the kitchen counter, making coffee the way she always had. No questions, no dramatic glances, just casual domesticity, like I'd always been there. "You sleep okay?" she asked without turning. "I slept," I answered. She reached into the cabinet for a second mug. "Funny thing came to mind last night. Do you remember when Callista was in high school and accused that girl, Leah something, of stealing her earrings before prom?" I turned toward her. "No." Rowena chuckled softly. "She had the whole school whispering about it. Leah swore up and down she didn't touch them. Turned out Callista left them in her gym locker the whole time." I didn't respond. "I always figured it was nerves," Rowena continued. "You know how Callista gets when she's the center of attention. A little dramatic." "Yeah," I said quietly, stirring my coffee. "It's a pattern. But no one said anything then either." Rowena looked over at me. She didn't argue, didn't excuse it, just nodded. The way people do when they know you're right, but are too late to matter. After breakfast, I opened my laptop just to distract myself. No emails, no messages. Just a notification from my mother's Facebook post, "Countdown to Callista's wedding." Out of morbid curiosity, I clicked. The album was full of carefully filtered photos. Callista's engagement shoot, the bridal shower, even a few candids from home. I noticed something odd by the third image. I wasn't in any of them, not even in the background. Then I saw one. An old picture from when we were kids. We'd been at some fall festival, pumpkins in the background. I knew the photo because I remembered the boots I wore that day. But in this version, the frame ended just before my shoulder. Cropped out, clean, and deliberate. I closed the laptop without finishing the album. You don't need fire to erase someone. You just stop tagging them. That night, I laid in the same uncomfortable futon and stared back up at the ceiling. But the shadows weren't just shapes anymore. They felt familiar. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't Callista having a bad day or Mom being overwhelmed. This was who they were. They didn't defend me because defending me meant questioning the story. And stories, especially in our family, were sacred. They made us look good. And looking good, to them, had always been more important than being good. They could lose a daughter, but not the version of themselves they'd curated for the world. Lying there, I whispered the truth to no one but myself. If I want to survive this, I have to stop hoping they'll change. If a story's told often enough, people stop asking if it's true. They just start repeating it louder. The night after I saw my face missing from the photos, I didn't sleep. I stayed up watching the porch light blink in and out, like it couldn't decide whether to burn out or hold on. Ilara found me the next evening, sitting on the front steps with a cup of instant coffee and no appetite. She didn't bring it up right away. We just sat there, letting the stillness between us say what our mouths didn't need to. The porch creaked beneath us. Summer bugs clicked through the air. "You should tell them again," she said eventually, barely above a whisper. "Just once. Maybe write it down. If they read it, they'll have to sit with it." I didn't answer right away. I kept stirring my coffee, though there was nothing left to dissolve. They already made up their minds, I said. They didn't need a reason. They just needed a way to look clean doing it. She nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. She didn't push. That was the difference between her and everyone else. Ilara didn't need me to perform pain to prove it was real. That night, I drafted a letter I never printed. I stared at the cursor blinking back at me on the screen like it was daring me to hit send. I wrote down the facts, the timeline, the way it all spiraled, and then I deleted it all and shut the laptop. What would it change? They'd built a story they liked better. Still, I sent one final thing. A voice memo. Just my voice. No edits, no tears. Dad, I began. I'm not calling to beg. I just want to know, did you ever believe me? Even a little? I ended the message there. Clean, honest. I didn't listen back before hitting send. He never replied. The app told me it was opened. That was all I needed to know. The morning I went back to the house to collect the last of my things, the sky was gray and low, like it was holding its breath. I parked on the opposite curb, waited a few minutes, then walked up the driveway like a stranger, unsure if they were allowed. No one was home. The inside of the house was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt sanitized, staged. My room was exactly how I'd left it, except for one addition. A page taped to the wall, eye level. The wedding itinerary. My name was still there, just not in the way it had once been. Someone had taken a thick black marker and drawn a line through it. Clean, intentional, permanent. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Then I took it down, folded it once, and slid it into my duffel with the rest of my clothes. Before I left, I sent Ilara a voice note. It's almost like they needed proof I was never part of it to begin with. I didn't wait for a response. Outside, I sat in my car across the street. Just sat. The engine off, windows cracked, fingers tapping the steering wheel. A few minutes later, Vivian's car pulled in. She parked like she always did, crooked, one tire slightly over the line. She got out, holding a shopping bag and her phone, talking to someone. Her laugh was loud, too loud for that time of morning. She didn't look over. She didn't pause. She walked inside and closed the door behind her, like she was returning to something unbroken. I didn't get out. I didn't wave. I just put the key in the ignition and drove. If I had gotten out, it wouldn't have been to make peace. It would have been to remind them I still existed. And that's not why you should ever go home. Some families bury the truth. Mine hosted a wedding over it. I didn't cry when I got back to Ilara's. That stage had passed. What remained was something quieter, more measured. I sat on the edge of the futon in her garage-turned guest room and stared at the wall for a while, listening to the soft hum of her upstairs shower and the distant sound of someone mowing a lawn 2 blocks away. I wasn't thinking about what they did anymore. I was thinking about what they needed to believe in order to do it. That night, Ilara knocked once before stepping into the room. She held her phone out, her brow pinched in that way that always meant something serious. "You need to see this," she said. I took the phone and looked at the screen. A photo. One of those overly curated Instagram shots posted by Callista's stylist. She stood behind my sister, adjusting the veil, while Callista beamed at her reflection in a floor-length mirror. I almost handed it back, until I saw the shoes. Louboutins. White satin, red bottoms. Clearly the same pair she'd claimed I stole. "What date was this?" I asked, though I already felt the answer forming in my chest. 2 days after she told everyone they were missing, Ilara said. I nodded slowly. "She never lost them," I murmured. "She just needed me gone." It wasn't rage, not even betrayal at that point. It was clarity, sharp, simple, and overdue. The next morning, I drove across town to the strip mall where my old job used to be. The store had changed names, but the logo on the door still looked like it hadn't decided who it was trying to impress. I parked around back and opened my laptop from the passenger seat. The Wi-Fi from the neighboring coffee shop barely reached, but it was enough. I still had an old admin login buried in my inbox, expired for most things, but not for purchase history. I typed in Callista's name and waited. There it was. 3 days after she told our parents I took her shoes, she'd placed a rush order for an identical pair, delivered express to our house. I took a screenshot, saved it, then grabbed the Instagram photo and paired them together in a folder. When I got back to Alara's, I printed both and slid them into a manila folder. On the tab, I wrote one word in thick Sharpie. Proof. This isn't revenge, I told Alara that night as we sorted through timestamps and order confirmations. It's survival, with receipts. She didn't argue, just nodded and went back to highlighting Callista's order time on the invoice. I spent the next few hours building a timeline. Not to send, not yet, but to keep. Because I'd learned something most people never say out loud. The truth isn't what convinces people. Timing does. I opened a blank email and addressed it to my father. I attached 2 files, the screenshot of the shoes being tried on and the receipt showing Callista bought them, after accusing me. In the body of the email, I typed, "You deserved to know the truth. What you do with it is your choice." But I didn't send it. The truth is only useful if you use it when they least expect it, not when you're still hoping they'll believe you. I closed the laptop and set the folder on the nightstand like it was a fire alarm I hoped I'd never have to pull. And as I laid down, staring at the ceiling again, I finally felt the balance start to shift. Not because I had the upper hand, but because I finally knew where I stood. I wasn't going to scream my innocence. I was going to let them choke on their own silence. I woke up the next morning with a kind of steadiness I didn't expect. Not peace, but direction. There's a difference. I brewed a pot of coffee before Alara got up. It felt good to move through her kitchen with quiet purpose. I laid out the photos, receipts, the timeline, checked everything twice, and then, on a blank sheet of paper, I wrote, "This is what really happened. If you read this and still choose silence, you're choosing complicity." I didn't write my name. I didn't need to. I folded the letter, slipped it into the manila folder, marked proof, and sealed the envelope. On the front, I wrote in simple block letters, "To the bride, private." Alara came down the stairs, just as I was slipping it into my bag. "You're really going to do it?" she asked. I nodded. I don't need them to agree with me. I need them to know I'm not afraid of being seen anymore. That afternoon, I drove to the vineyard where the ceremony was scheduled. It was the kind of place that looked like it had been pulled out of a bridal magazine. Stone paths, curated wildflowers, those fake rustic signs that say things like, "Pick a seat, not a side." At the front desk, a woman in a headset was fielding calls and scribbling notes. I handed her the envelope. "This is for Callista Aldridge. Please make sure she receives it, directly, 1 hour before the ceremony." She nodded, distracted but compliant, and tucked the envelope behind the counter. I didn't linger. I didn't need to watch the moment happen. That was never the point. It wasn't revenge. It was a record. That night, I sent one last email. Same subject line, same attachments. But this time, I sent it to my father. The system said it had been read less than 5 minutes later. No reply. No. I see. No, I'm sorry. Not even a middle of the road. Let's talk. The scariest part isn't being disbelieved. It's being ignored with full knowledge. I sat in Alara's living room with the lights off, the television muted, and let the quiet stretch long. My phone stayed face down. I didn't need to stare at the nothing that wasn't coming. The next morning, the wedding was scheduled for noon. I didn't go. But at 12:42 p.m., Alara texted me one word. Opened. I didn't ask how she knew. I didn't need to. I imagined the moment. Callista, somewhere behind a wall of chiffon and hairspray, opening the envelope, scanning the documents, realizing what had been placed directly into her perfect little narrative, like a crack in the porcelain. She didn't cancel the wedding. Of course not. They'd already rented the chairs. I heard later, through someone's tagged photo, that the ceremony went on. Picture perfect. Her smile was there, but her eyes looked somewhere else. Not sad, not ashamed, just removed. As if even she knew the scene didn't belong to her anymore. The photographer posted a shot that evening. Callista and Griffin under the floral arch, hands joined, lips smiling. You could almost believe it was joy. Almost. But I knew. Alara knew. The envelope had done its job. It didn't destroy the wedding. It corrupted the script. She walked down the aisle, but this time, the lie walked with her. 2 days after the wedding, I was sitting in a coffee shop tucked into the corner of a strip mall, just far enough from town to breathe. The kind of place with chipped ceramic mugs and staff that didn't bother to learn your name, unless you asked them to. I hadn't ordered anything beyond a refill, and I didn't plan to. I just needed a seat where I didn't owe anyone an expression. Alara's message came through at 11:47 a.m. Just a link, no words. I clicked it. It was a live stream replay, Callista, glowing in her usual curated perfection, seated in front of a window that caught just enough light to make her look angelic. The caption read, "Grateful beyond words. Family first." She smiled like nothing cracked beneath her. Like no envelope had ever been opened. Like truth hadn't slipped into her morning like a needle through silk. "I want to thank everyone who helped make the wedding the most magical day of our lives," she began. "Family, friends, even those who weren't able to be there physically. Your energy was with us." And then she leaned forward slightly, soft voice sharp as glass. "In the end, families are about loyalty, even when not everyone chooses the high road." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. It landed like a slap anyway. I watched the chat replay roll by. Heart emojis, clapping hands. "So proud of you, Callista." And underneath it, the slow crawl of something familiar. Assumptions in real time. She handled that with such grace. Glad she removed the toxic energy early. Some people just can't handle someone else's shine. I closed the tab. It wasn't that I didn't expect it. I did. I'd seen this script before. It was just something else to see it performed so publicly. Like my erasure wasn't just necessary, it was aspirational. Later that afternoon, I stopped at the grocery store for a few things. Bread, lemons, something that felt like control. As I turned the corner by the produce section, I almost missed her. Aunt Gwen, one of those relatives who only showed up at funerals or milestone birthdays. She spotted me before I could retreat. "Well," she said, clutching her purse to her chest like I might lunge for it. "It's good to see you out. I know things got messy." I met her eyes and smiled, tight and polite. "Only for people who believed the mess was mine." She gave a small nod, lips pursed like she'd swallowed something bitter. "Well, I always say, family is complicated." I left the lemons and walked out with nothing in my hands. Back home, Ilara was in the living room folding laundry, the TV on low but ignored. She looked up when I came in and raised an eyebrow. "She's not done," she said. "I know," I answered. "She's not just telling a story, Mar. She's painting you as the jealous sister who can't move on." I walked to the bookshelf, pulled out the envelope I had sealed what felt like years ago, but was only last week. I ran my thumb across the crease. "She's not painting me," I said. "She's erasing me and filling in the blanks." I unfolded the letter and read it again. The same words. The same truth. Still unsigned. Still mine. It wasn't regret I felt. It was restraint. Like holding a match inches from gasoline and choosing, for now, not to strike. They built their version of me out of shadows and forgot I still knew how to light a match. I didn't have to wait long. The fallout didn't come in whispers this time. It crashed through the front door. Monday morning, I got a call from my attorney. I'd been holding off, dragging my feet on whether to actually move forward. But after the live stream, after the twisted performance Callista gave to the world, it wasn't a question anymore. I didn't want revenge, I wanted record. And now, That record was official. The claim went out that same afternoon. Emotional distress, defamation, financial harm, all backed with timestamps, receipts, and one video clip I hadn't intended to use until it became necessary. In it, Callista sat on a Zoom call weeks before the wedding, laughing with a friend. Her voice was crisp, relaxed, almost proud. Of course I made it up. I didn't need her sulking around my wedding. No hesitation, no hint of guilt. Just a casual confession wrapped in designer vanity. That clip landed harder than I could have planned. And I hadn't planned it. Back at Ilara's, I was cleaning out the fridge when she burst in through the side door, her phone in one hand, grocery bags dangling from the other. "It's out," she said. Her face had gone pale, the way people look when they see a train coming before it hits. "What's out?" She handed me her phone. The video had leaked. Not from me, not from Ilara. Someone had forwarded it through private messages, which turned into screenshots, which turned into TikToks, which turned into headlines. Bride kicks sister out over fake theft, gets exposed. Callista's voice played on loop, her face frozen in mid-smirk. People weren't debating what happened anymore. They were watching it. The next day was supposed to be her honeymoon flight. Mexico, some all-inclusive resort where the pillows were probably monogrammed and every cocktail came with a gold stir stick. Instead, Griffin released a statement through a family friend. It read like something from a PR firm, polished but unmistakably clear. "Due to newly surfaced information, I've decided to end our engagement. I wish Callista the best, but cannot move forward in this relationship." I read it twice. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just felt quiet, settled. Not because he left, but because he finally saw who she chose to be when she thought no one was looking. That evening, Callista's bridal Instagram went dark. Comments were disabled. Photos were pulled. Even mom and dad's accounts turned private. The family thread we all used to text on holidays went silent. No one reached out, not to explain, not to accuse. Nothing. For the first time, their silence wasn't a weapon. It was surrender. I walked out to the porch and sat down, letting the air settle around me. Ilara brought me a glass of water and didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The truth had done what it was supposed to do. It didn't scream. It didn't demand anything. It just stood up and held its ground. And I didn't break the family. I just stopped pretending their version of it existed. For a long time, I'd believed I had to stay quiet to keep the peace, to preserve something called home. But silence hadn't saved me. It had erased me. Now the lies cracked open, and instead of running, I stood still and watched the light pour in. By Tuesday morning, the storm had quieted, but the damage had deepened. The texts had stopped. The online noise had cooled. No new headlines. Just silence. The kind that doesn't soothe. The kind that settles in like mildew, quiet but suffocating. I made myself toast and stared at it until it went cold. The clink of my mug hitting the counter was the only sound in the house. I checked my bank app without much thought. Habit, maybe. And that's when the next wave hit, login denied. I tried again. Same result. I called the customer service line, navigated through 6 automated menus, and finally reached a person. "Sorry, ma'am," the rep said. "It looks like your access was removed last month. The primary account holder requested it." "Last month?" I asked. "Yes, June 12th, 2 days after the shoes disappeared." I hung up, not angrily, just thoroughly. I didn't realize silence could also sign paperwork. It wasn't about the money, it was the message. You're not part of this anymore. That afternoon, I had a Zoom interview with a company in Nashville. A decent job, logistics coordinator, remote options, real benefits. I wore a pressed button-up, tied my hair back, and practiced my answers like I was preparing for court. The interviewer was polite, until he wasn't. "Before we move forward," he said, clearing his throat, "we do perform online screenings, just general name checks. And something did come up recently. My stomach didn't drop. It settled. We're looking for stability, he continued. No drama history. I nodded. So being a victim is a liability? He blinked, clearly not prepared for a response that didn't involve backpedaling. I didn't say that, he stammered. No, I said, still calm. But you didn't have to. We ended the call 3 minutes later. Their lie had followed me into rooms they'd never even entered. That night, Alara and I ate dinner in silence until she pushed her plate aside and said, "They're bleeding you slow and clean, even now, even after the video, after the wedding, after the fallout." I didn't respond right away. "Because now they can't control the narrative," I finally said. "So they'll try to control the cost." She nodded, jaw clenched. "It's like they can't imagine you existing outside the version of you they created. The one who's bitter, the one who's petty, the one who needs to be cut off." The silverware clinked against empty plates. There was no one left to toast, but somehow the table still carried the weight of performance. Later that week, I walked through town to clear my head. I passed a small bridal boutique on Main Street, the one I'd once interviewed at for a weekend job years ago. It had changed owners, but the window display looked the same. Ivory gowns, soft lighting, photos of brides with champagne flutes and airbrushed cheekbones. And there they were, shoes. Not the same brand, not the same model, but close enough to stop me. A memory came back. Junior year, prom season. Callista had wanted a specific pair of heels she couldn't afford. Mom said no. I'd used half my paycheck from a diner job to split the cost with her. She never thanked me. Back then, I thought we were just sisters doing what sisters did. Looking at that window now, it struck me. She never stole from me. Not really. She borrowed credit, and then rewrote who gave it to her. I stood there longer than I needed to, until someone inside glanced up, and I realized how long I'd been staring. Walking home, I thought about everything they hadn't said, the calls they hadn't made, the things they hadn't tried to fix. I used to think silence protected them. Now I know it just prolonged the cost. By the time I reached for my second cup of coffee, Alara had already been pacing the hallway for 10 minutes. She wasn't subtle. Her steps were fast, sharp, and then she stopped dead in front of my bedroom door. "Mar," she said, voice low, "you need to see this." I opened the door. She handed me her phone. It was a screen recording, no edits, no captions, no context needed. Just a raw clip from a Zoom call, dated weeks before the wedding. Callista was front and center, sipping from a wine glass and laughing into her camera. "She always made things weird," she said too casually. "Better she wasn't around for the big day." The friend on the call chuckled, not knowing they were co-writing a confession. I stared at the video in silence. The internet doesn't ask if you're ready for justice. It just serves it raw. Within hours, it was everywhere. Screenshots hit group chats. Someone reposted it to TikTok with a dramatic voiceover and piano music. It found its way to Reddit, then to a few blog sites that specialized in family scandals gone viral. And like that, it was public. By noon, I was getting messages I hadn't asked for, from people I hadn't heard from in years. At first, I thought the worst was over, that maybe I could breathe. But I hadn't learned my lesson yet. The betrayal didn't come from the enemy. It came from the silence I once mistook for safety. That evening, I got a string of texts from a former friend, Claire. We hadn't talked much during the scandal. She'd stayed neutral, didn't post, didn't call. I assumed she didn't know what to say. Turns out she said plenty. Just to the wrong person. Screenshots landed in my inbox. Claire had sent Callista a copy of a voice memo I'd once trusted her with. My voice. My pain. Me, trying to process in real time, not knowing it would be ammunition for someone else's justification. "She's so dramatic," Claire had written. "Honestly, maybe Callista isn't wrong." I stared at the screen. My own voice, turned weapon, in the hands of people who didn't deserve to hold it. I thought silence from her meant she didn't know what to say. I told Alara. Turns out she said everything to the wrong person. The family went dark. Profiles disappeared. Photos were taken down. Comments disabled. But the story didn't stop. Then, like a ripple finally finding the edge of the shore, something unexpected happened. A comment appeared under a local newspaper article about the video. It wasn't anonymous. I stayed quiet before. Not anymore. Marilee didn't deserve any of this. It was from my cousin Nate, someone who had always avoided conflict like it was contagious. His words cracked something open, not just online, but in my chest. When people whisper long enough, they forget how to speak truth. Until someone else does it first. Support trickled in, not out of pity, but out of reflection. People weren't apologizing for their silence. They were waking up to the weight of it. A day later, I walked downtown to clear my head. Franklin isn't big, but it carries gossip like heirlooms. I passed the bookstore, then the courthouse, then the local newsstand. 2 reporters stood outside the cafe, holding coffee and camera bags. I overheard just enough to know they were covering the bride versus sister defamation case. They didn't recognize me. Or maybe they did and just chose not to make it worse. Either way, I kept walking, eyes ahead, phone off. They could talk about me now. They could speculate, post, share, spin. I no longer needed to be present to own my name. My story had been stolen, buried, rewritten, and then resurrected in pixels and print. They made me invisible, but now I'm the one story they can't unsee. The next voicemail came on a Tuesday morning, sometime after sunrise. I was walking the loop trail behind the old middle school, letting the cold air wake me up. My phone buzzed, and when I saw the name, I stopped walking. Vivienne. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want her words in my ears. I wanted them recorded, permanent, traceable. She started with a soft laugh, the kind she used when she was about to say something that wasn't really funny. Marilee, honey, maybe it's time we talk. People are starting to ask uncomfortable questions. No mention of truth, no mention of me. Just the echo of reputation management. I sat down on the low wooden bench by the basketball court. It was covered in frost. I didn't care. It wasn't guilt calling me. It was image maintenance. Later, back at Elara's, I opened the voice memo app on my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then I hit record. If your concern is neighbors, not truth, then we don't have anything to talk about. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back. And I'm no longer waiting to be invited in. I paused. Let the air hang for a few seconds. Then I deleted the message without saving it. Some replies are more powerful when you never send them. That night, Alara brought me tea, as she did most evenings. We sat in the living room, the muted television playing a rerun of something neither of us were watching. Halfway through the cup, she looked over the rim of her mug and said, "You didn't owe them silence, but you also didn't owe them re-entry." I exhaled. "I didn't walk away," I said. "I just stopped standing where they wanted to bury me." We didn't speak after that. We didn't have to. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come. So I turned on the lamp and pulled out a journal I'd picked up from the corner pharmacy. Still crisp, uncreased. I opened to the first page and wrote in small, deliberate letters, "Forgiveness isn't the same as re-invitation." I stared at the sentence for a while, let it sit. Then I took the old family photo I kept tucked inside the drawer. It used to sit on my desk in a silver frame. Now, I just looked at it when I needed to remind myself how much distance could exist between people standing in the same picture. In it, we were all younger, sun on our faces, smiles tight but believable. Callista's hand on my shoulder, my mother's pearls catching the light, my father squinting into the sun like he hadn't expected it. We looked like a family. We looked believable. But pictures lie too. Sometimes better than people. I slid it back into the drawer, face down. You can outgrow even the people who raised you, especially when they stopped recognizing what they planted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hungry for justice or closure or contrition. What I wanted was silence, this time on my terms. They wanted a daughter who stayed quiet. What they got was a woman who remembers everything. Thanksgiving came colder than expected, the kind of November chill that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. I drove to Rowena's house with the windows rolled up, the heater barely making a dent in the silence between me and Alara. She didn't talk much that morning, just handed me a pie wrapped in foil and said, "You don't have to stay long." And I knew what she meant. We pulled into the driveway just as a few other cars were arriving, the kind of familiar vehicles you recognized not by the license plate, but by the rust spots and missing hubcaps that never got fixed. Inside, the house smelled of turkey, cinnamon, and forced conversation. I hadn't seen most of them since before the wedding, or the fallout. And even though I was technically invited, it still felt like trespassing. Vivian was already there, standing by the window with a glass of white wine and a smile too polished for a day built on turkey and apologies unsaid. Silas was beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes darting between conversations like he was looking for the safest place to land. No one rushed to greet me. Rowena had set a long dining table in the living room, stretched to its max, with folding chairs on the ends. But there was one seat, at the far corner, that hadn't been claimed. A place setting, untouched. Forks aligned, napkin folded, but no name card. No plate. It was intentional. Everyone saw it. No one acknowledged it. Callista wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. A cousin leaned over at one point and whispered, "Guess she didn't want to be the one sitting next to the truth." I didn't laugh. I didn't need to. People glanced at the empty seat, then at me. But no one said what they were thinking. That's how consequences often look. Not like justice, but absence. After dinner, I helped Rowena clear dishes. The room had thinned out, voices quieter, plates scraped clean. In the kitchen, she handed me a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. "Found it in Grandma's old recipe box," she said. "Figured you should have it." I opened it slowly. It was a note, written in the shaky cursive I hadn't seen since before she passed. I never said it out loud, but I always knew which one of you carried the truth. There was no signature, just the weight of words that had waited too long to land. I folded it carefully, slid it into my bag, and didn't say a word. As the night wound down, guests filtered toward coats and car keys. Vivian approached me at the door, her voice tight, like she was trying to thread a needle with a fraying string. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to the family." I looked her in the eye, not with anger, not with pity, just clarity. "That family doesn't include everyone anymore, and I've made peace with that." She nodded, lips pressed together. No hug, no invitation to talk again. I stepped outside, into the dark. At home, I lit a small candle on the table and opened the folding chair I'd picked up last week from a thrift store. It creaked slightly as I set it down across from where I usually ate. No second place setting, no audience, just me. I no longer need a seat at their table. I've built one that doesn't collapse when I sit in it. They may have tried to replace me with a lie, but I learned to live louder than their silence.